The squeak of old shoes. The worn leather of Nurse Anya's shoes sighed with each step, a familiar, almost comforting rhythm in the hushed hospital corridor. This cadence, a constant companion through countless rounds and whispered reassurances, today felt less like a comfort and more like a spotlight. Each creak announced her approach to Dr. Elias Thorne's office, its door ajar. She hesitated, her hand poised above the polished oak. This unscheduled summons, delivered by a terse note on her desk, was unusual. Dr. Thorne typically favored official channels, or a clipped nod across the ward. A faint scent of aged paper and something vaguely antiseptic wafted from within. Taking a steadying breath, Anya nudged the door fully open. Elias sat behind his imposing desk, patient charts stacked high, nearly obscuring his slender hands. He looked up, his gaze intense, and gestured to the chair opposite. "Nurse Petrova, thank you for coming." His voice was unexpectedly subdued, lacking its usual crisp authority. Anya perched on the edge of the surprisingly plush chair. "Of course, doctor. Is everything all right?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk. "I observed you with Mrs. Henderson this morning. The way you engaged with her. And then, young Michael Henderson. He seemed quite taken with you." Elias paused, his eyes narrowing. "He inquired about your shoes." Anya's cheeks flushed. She instinctively tucked her feet beneath the chair, the scuffed leather suddenly feeling quite conspicuous. "My shoes?" she echoed, a ripple of unease replacing her initial mild curiosity. Had she inadvertently offended a patient? Yes. He said they reminded him of his grandmother's. He called them wise, because they'd witnessed so much. Elias's lips twitched, a fleeting hint of a smile that vanished quickly. It's uncommon to see such a connection with a child, or indeed any patient, extending beyond purely clinical interactions. He picked up a pen, twirling it between his fingers. "I've been reviewing some of the older patient files. Mrs. Henderson's, specifically. You've been her primary nurse for quite some time, haven't you?" "Yes, since her admission," Anya confirmed, a knot tightening in her stomach. What was the underlying point? Was this about her performance, her attire? Elias set the pen down with a decisive click. "Tell me, Nurse Petrova, what do you know about Mrs. Henderson's previous hospitalizations? Before her current diagnosis, I mean. Specifically, about the circumstances surrounding her son, Michael's, original admission here, many years ago." Anya's mind raced. Michael Henderson's previous admission. That predated her tenure, long before her old footwear had ever creaked through these corridors. The air in the room seemed to thicken, suddenly charged with unspoken import. The seemingly casual inquiry had transmuted into something far more substantial, far more disquieting. She met Elias's unwavering gaze, a sudden chill tracing a path down her spine. The innocent creak of her shoes had ushered her into waters far deeper than she could have imagined. A near slip. The scent of antiseptic and stale coffee clung to Alara's worn uniform as she navigated the bustling corridor of St. Jude's. It was late, past visiting hours, and the hospital hummed with a different kind of energy, a quiet, almost melancholic drone. She clutched a stack of updated charts, her old shoes squeaking softly against the polished linoleum. Dr. Alastair Finch, the chief of surgery's son, was on rounds tonight, a fact that always seemed to heighten the tension on the floor. As she rounded the corner near the nurse's station, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through her ankle. Her foot caught on something, a loose floor tile, perhaps, or a dropped pen. Her arms flew out, charts scattering like fallen leaves, and for a terrifying second, Alara felt herself pitching forward, a dizzying spiral towards the hard floor. Time seemed to slow. She saw the glint of the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished floor, heard the gasps of a few passing orderlies. Before she could hit the ground, a strong arm shot out, catching her just beneath her elbow. Alara gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was pulled upright, a steadying hand on her back. "Careful there, nurse," a voice rumbled, deep and surprisingly gentle. She twisted, her face flushed with embarrassment, to find herself looking up into the piercing blue eyes of Dr. Finch. He was closer than she expected, his proximity a sudden, unexpected warmth. He still had a firm grip on her arm, preventing another wobble. "Dr. Finch." Elara stammered, feeling her cheeks burn. "Thank you. I'm so clumsy." He released her, bending to scoop up the scattered charts with an easy grace. "Not clumsy, just overworked, perhaps." His gaze flickered to her shoes, a brief, almost imperceptible glance that made her acutely aware of their scuffed leather. "Are you all right? You nearly took a tumble." "Yes, perfectly fine, thank you," she lied, a dull ache throbbing in her ankle. She reached for the charts, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He didn't pull away immediately. "You're on the late shift again," he observed, his voice a quiet statement rather than a question. He handed her the last of the papers. "Don't let yourself get too run down, nurse." Elara clutched the charts, the weight of his concern a surprising burden in comfort. "Just doing my job, doctor." She managed a small, tired smile. The incident had shaken her more than she let on. The thought of falling, of being unable to work, sent a shiver down her spine. The hospital was a delicate ecosystem, and a single slip could disrupt everything. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. Well, try to keep your footing." He turned, a faint rustle of his pristine white coat, and continued down the corridor, leaving Elara to gather herself, her heart still thrumming a frantic rhythm. The near slip had been more than just a physical incident, it had been a stark reminder of her precarious position, and the unexpected, unsettling presence of Dr. Finch had only amplified it. Small acts of kindness. The scent of stale antiseptic and cheap coffee clung to Clara's uniform as she navigated the labyrinthine hospital corridors. Her worn shoes, a testament to countless shifts, squeaked a rhythm against the polished linoleum. Dr. Eris Thorne, his brow furrowed in concentration, passed her near the nurse's station, a fleeting glance his only acknowledgement. He was always in a hurry, always absorbed. Later, as she prepared Mrs. Henderson's evening medication, a soft sob drew her attention. A young man, probably in his early 20s, sat hunched in a visitor's chair, his face buried in his hands. His mother, Clara knew, was in critical condition. Without a second thought, Clara poured him a cup of the lukewarm, overly strong coffee from the staff room, the best she could offer. "Here," she said softly, extending the mug. "It's not much, but it might help." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. "Thank you, nurse," he mumbled, his voice raspy. I haven't slept in 2 days." "I understand," Clara replied, her voice gentle. "Take a few minutes, okay? We're looking after her." She then pulled a small, worn blanket from a nearby linen cart and draped it over his shivering shoulders. The hospital air conditioning was relentless. He offered a weak, grateful smile. Eris, returning from a consult, observed the exchange from the end of the hall. He hadn't noticed the young man before, so engrossed was he in his patient's charts. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face, perhaps surprise, perhaps something deeper, before he continued on his way, a stack of papers clutched in his hand. The next morning, Clara found a small, neatly folded note on the nurse's station counter. It was from the young man. "My mother passed peacefully last night," it read. "Your kindness made those final hours bearable for us both. Thank you." A single, perfect white rose lay beside the note, its petals still dewy. A small act, Clara thought, but it meant something. As she picked up the rose, Eris approached, a faint aroma of expensive cologne preceding him. "Nurse Anya," he began, then corrected himself. "Nurse Clara. I saw you yesterday with that young man. His mother, she passed. I believe he left something for you." He gestured vaguely towards the rose. His gaze, usually so distant, seemed to linger on her face, a question forming in his eyes. "Those shoes," he then said, his voice surprisingly soft, "they look uncomfortable. Are you all right?" Clara's hand, holding the rose, tightened almost imperceptibly. The question, so unexpected, made her heart skip a beat. She met his gaze, a quiet defiance in her own. "I'm fine, doctor," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "Just another day." The sad old man. The scent of stale disinfectant and boiled cabbage clung to the air in Ward C, a familiar, unwelcome perfume. Elara adjusted the thin blanket over Mr. Henderson, his chest rising and falling with the shallow rhythm of a tired clock. He was a new admission, though his face carried the lines of a man who'd seen too many hospital rooms. Today, however, he looked worse than usual. His eyes, usually a faded blue, were bloodshot, and a sheen of sweat beaded on his forehead. "Rough night, Mr. Henderson?" Elara asked softly, her voice a gentle counterpoint to the distant clang of a trolley. He merely grunted, turning his head away from her, a gesture that spoke volumes. The ward was still largely quiet, the pre-dawn hush broken only by the occasional cough or the distant hum of the ventilation system. Elara checked his chart, noting the recent spike in his blood pressure. She knew his history, a retired postal worker, widowed, estranged from his only son. A lonely man, made lonelier by illness. Later that morning, during her rounds, she found him staring out the window, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked pane. He wasn't watching the dreary weather, though, his eyes seemed to be seeing something far beyond the hospital grounds. "The doctor will be in soon to discuss your test results," Elara offered, trying to prompt a response. He sighed, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to pull at the very fabric of his old clothes. "It doesn't matter, lass. Nothing matters anymore." His voice was raspy, laden with a despair that settled heavily in the small room. Elara felt a familiar pang of sympathy, a professional distance battling with her innate compassion. She remembered her own mother's quiet resignation in her final days. "It always matters, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Your health matters." He turned then, his eyes, still bloodshot, meeting hers. There was a raw vulnerability there, a glimmer of the man he once was, before life had stripped him bare. They say I might not have much time left." He didn't cry, but his lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly. "My son, he won't even visit." The words hung in the air, a silent accusation against a world that had forgotten him. Elara reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before gently resting on his arm. His skin felt like old parchment. "Perhaps he doesn't know how serious it is," she suggested, though she knew that often wasn't the case. He shook his head slowly. "He knows. He just doesn't care." A single tear, thick and slow, tracked a path down his weathered cheek. Elara squeezed his arm reassuringly, her heart aching for this sad, old man. She knew then that beyond the medical charts and diagnostic tests, there was a deeper wound that needed tending, one that no medicine could cure. She had to do something, anything, to bring a flicker of hope back to his fading eyes. A glimmer of hope. The scent of stale antiseptic and fear still clung to Elara's worn uniform, even after a full night's sleep. The image of Dr. Thorne's son, Liam, his eyes wide with a question she couldn't quite decipher, replayed in her mind. He hadn't asked about her shoes, not directly. Instead, his voice, a surprising baritone for a young man, had been soft, almost hesitant. "Are you all right, nurse?" he'd inquired, his gaze lingering on her face, not her feet. It was a simple question, yet it had disarmed her, leaving her with a blush she hadn't expected. Today, the hospital corridors felt less like a cage and more like a challenge. The morning rounds were brutal, a relentless tide of coughs, groans, and the ever-present beeping of machines. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet old woman with a perpetually worried frown, tugged at Elara's sleeve. "Nurse, my heart, it feels like a butterfly trapped in a jar." Elara gently squeezed the patient's hand, her smile a practiced reassurance. Just a little flutter, Mrs. Henderson. We'll get you some tea and a good book, and that butterfly will settle right down. As she moved away, she spotted Liam Thorne at the end of the ward, observing. He wasn't in his usual crisp lab coat, but a simple charcoal sweater, making him seem less like a doctor's son and more approachable. He met her gaze, and a faint smile touched his lips, a genuine warmth that surprised her. Later, while charting in the dimly lit nurse's station, a shadow fell over her desk. Mind if I borrow this pen? Liam asked, his voice a low rumble. He leaned against the counter, not too close, but close enough for her to catch the faint scent of something clean and woodsy. Help yourself, Elara replied, her heart doing a quick tap dance. She tried to focus on the patient files, but his presence was a tangible thing, a quiet hum in the air. Rough day? He asked, not looking at her directly, but at the scribbled notes on her chart. Just another Tuesday, she said, trying to sound nonchalant. He finally turned to her, his blue eyes surprisingly intense. You always seem to handle it with grace. Even when things are difficult. His gaze flickered, briefly, to her feet, then quickly back to her eyes. My father mentioned you're one of our most dedicated nurses. A blush crept up Elara's neck. Dr. Thorne, the formidable chief of staff, rarely offered compliments, and certainly not to her. I just do my job, she mumbled, suddenly self-conscious. It's more than that, Liam countered, his voice softer now. He hesitated, then continued, I was wondering, if you're not busy later, perhaps you'd allow me to buy you a coffee? There's a new place down the street, supposedly makes a decent espresso. The offer hung in the air, a fragile, unexpected bloom. A coffee. Not a pity offering, not a question about her circumstances, but a simple invitation. A glimmer. I'd like that, Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of the day, the worn shoes, the endless demands, all seemed to lighten, just a fraction. A plan hatches. The scent of stale coffee and disinfectant clung to the air of the break room, a familiar backdrop to Elara's simmering frustration. Dr. Alastair Finch's words from yesterday, sharp and dismissive, still stung. Nurse Holloway, your resourcefulness is admirable, but perhaps some tasks are best left to those with the appropriate credentials. He hadn't just dismissed her, he'd subtly belittled her, a familiar pattern since she'd started at St. Jude's. Across the worn laminate table, Liam, Alastair's younger brother and a newly minted resident, fiddled with a sugar packet. He's just stressed, Elara. The new departmental budget cuts are hitting him hard. Elara snorted, the sound unladylike but honest. Stress doesn't give someone license to be a patronizing arse. I found that misplaced patient file, Liam, the one he spent an hour shouting about. And I did it by actually looking instead of just barking orders. She pushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, her old, comfortable shoes scuffing against the linoleum. Liam finally looked up, his brow furrowed. I know. He relies on you more than he'd ever admit. But I think I have an idea. Something that might actually get him to listen to your suggestions, properly listen. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Remember Mrs. Henderson's case? The one where Alastair insisted on a full battery of scans, but you suspected it was just a localized infection based on her initial symptoms. Elara's eyes narrowed. Yes. He ran up a four-figure bill before conceding I was right. Exactly, Liam whispered, a glint in his eye. What if we presented him with a test case? A scenario where your initial assessment, based on the subtle cues he always overlooks, proved more efficient and cost-effective than his usual protocol. Not a real patient, of course. A hypothetical. But detailed enough to be compelling. A flicker of intrigue sparked in Elara. A hypothetical patient whose symptoms perfectly align with a less invasive diagnosis, but which Alastair would likely overdiagnose. She tapped her chin, the wheels of her mind already turning. It would need to be subtle. Too obvious, and he'll just dismiss it as an attempt to undermine him. Liam nodded eagerly. Precisely. We'd present it as a brainstorming exercise for the new residents. A way to encourage critical thinking in a resource-strained environment. He'd be forced to engage, to analyze, and if your solution is demonstrably superior, he'd have to acknowledge it. A slow smile spread across Alara's face. The dull ache of frustration began to recede, replaced by a surge of focused energy. This wasn't about petty revenge, it was about proving a point, about demonstrating the invaluable insight gained from years on the front lines, observing, listening, and truly seeing patients, not just their charts. It's risky, she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it might just work. The stale air of the break room suddenly felt charged with possibility. The secret shopping trip. The crisp autumn air, usually a welcome invigorator, felt like a judgment as Clara hurried down the side streets. Her ancient shoes, their worn leather protesting with every step, seemed to echo her internal debate. She clutched her worn purse, its contents a surprising weight. Today was the day she'd break her strict budget, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Dr. Eris's pointed gaze, the one that lingered on her scuffed footwear, had been the final push. It wasn't pity she wanted, but she also didn't want to be an object of constant, unspoken scrutiny. Her destination was not the bustling main thoroughfare, but a small, tucked-away boutique she'd only ever glimpsed through dusty windows. The gilded thread, its elegant lettering proclaimed. It catered to a different clientele, one with deeper pockets and higher expectations. Clara felt a tremor of trepidation as she pushed open the heavy oak door. A tiny bell jingled, announcing her presence, and the scent of expensive fabric and delicate perfume enveloped her. Inside, the shop was a hushed sanctuary of muted colors and luxurious textures. Silks shimmered on racks, and soft wools draped over mannequins. A sales associate, impeccable in a charcoal suit, glided towards her. Clara's stomach tightened. "Good afternoon," the woman purred, her smile perfectly polite, yet somehow appraising. Clara cleared her throat. "I'm looking for a pair of shoes. Comfortable, but presentable." She felt her cheeks flush, the inadequacy of her current pair feeling amplified in this opulent setting. The associate's eyes, a shrewd blue, flickered to Clara's feet, then back up. "Of course. We have a new shipment of Italian leather. Follow me." She led Clara to a plush seating area, where rows of sleek, polished footwear gleamed under soft spotlights. Clara's breath caught. They weren't just shoes, they were sculptures. She pointed to a pair of low-heeled, deep burgundy pumps. "Those," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The price tag, when the associate produced it, was a brutal reality check. It was more than she earned in a week. Her hand trembled as she pulled out the stack of bills she'd been saving, penny by painful penny, for emergencies. This wasn't an emergency, not in the traditional sense, but it felt like one. The doctor's son, Leo, had been particularly observant that morning. His question, "Nurse Clara, are your feet always cold?" had been innocently asked, but it had cut deep. She paid, the crisp bills feeling flimsy as they left her hand. The associate packaged the shoes in a sleek, branded box, a whisper of tissue paper protecting their pristine surface. As Clara walked out, the weight of the box in her arms was both satisfying and heavy with the burden of her decision. She felt a surge of defiant pride, mixed with a healthy dose of guilt. The shoes were beautiful, an investment in her professional image, but they represented a sacrifice. What if an actual emergency arose now? The thought gnawed at her, a low hum beneath the satisfying click of the expensive box. She clutched it tighter, walking with a renewed, if slightly anxious, determination. A gift from the heart. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and a faint hint of wood smoke as Elias, bundled in a thick coat, made his way to the stables. The stable boy, a quiet lad named Finn, was already there, mucking out stalls with rhythmic scoops. Elias nodded a greeting, his gaze scanning the familiar space until it landed on a small, intricately carved wooden bird resting on a hay bale. Its wings were spread as if in mid-flight, and the grain of the wood gave it a lifelike texture. "Finn, did this just appear?" Elias asked, his voice softer than usual. Finn straightened, his face smudged with dirt. "Came with the morning delivery, sir. The driver said it was left for you, from a friend." He shrugged, clearly unconcerned with the mystery. Elias picked up the bird, its smooth surface cool beneath his fingers. He turned it over, examining the delicate craftsmanship. It was undeniably a robin, a bird his mother had loved. A strange lightness settled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the war. A memory surfaced, a sun-drenched afternoon, his mother pointing out a robin's nest in their garden, her eyes sparkling with delight. He pocketed the bird, a new resolve hardening his jaw. The delivery driver's words, "a friend," echoed in his mind. He knew who it was. The only person who understood the quiet ache in his heart. Later that day, the bustling corridors of the infirmary felt particularly sterile. Nurses moved with purpose, their starched uniforms rustling. Elias found Nurse Alara by a window, adjusting a vase of wildflowers. She wore her usual worn shoes, but today, a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Alara," he began, his voice a low rumble. She turned, her eyes, the color of moss after a rain, widened slightly. "I received a gift today." He pulled the wooden robin from his pocket, holding it out. "Did you?" A genuine smile, radiant and unburdened, blossomed on her face. "You liked it, then?" Her voice was a soft melody. "I saw a similar carving once, in a market, and it reminded me of something you mentioned about your mother." She hesitated, a shadow passing over her features. "I know it's not much, but I hoped, it's perfect," he interrupted, his gaze holding hers. "It's more than much, Alara. It's a piece of home." The words felt raw, vulnerable, but true. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions, a fragile bridge forming. A sudden commotion down the hall broke the spell. A frantic shout, the clatter of a fallen tray. Alara's professional demeanor snapped back into place. "Excuse me, doctor," she murmured, already moving towards the sound, her old shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. Elias watched her go, the wooden robin warm in his palm. The tension of the day, of the infirmary, still hummed around him, but a quiet hope had taken root. A gift from the heart, indeed. A spring in her step. The scent of damp earth and burgeoning hyacinths clung to the air as Alara stepped out, the morning sun, still a pale gold, warming her face. Her old shoes, usually a leaden weight, felt almost light today. A robin, puffed with spring, sang a cheerful, insistent melody from the budding dogwood, and Alara found herself humming along. The grim statistics of the hospital, the endless cycle of illness and recovery, seemed to recede with each step she took away from its imposing brick walls. Her destination was not the usual grocery store or the library, but Mrs. Albright's small cottage, nestled at the edge of town, surrounded by a riot of early blooms. Mrs. Albright, a retired seamstress with eyes that missed nothing, had promised to look at Alara's mother's old lace shawl. It was a flimsy excuse, of course, a pretense to escape the suffocating confines of the hospital and her own anxieties. The real draw was Mrs. Albright's renowned tea and the quiet wisdom she dispensed as freely as she offered sugar cubes. "Alara, dear." On time as ever, Mrs. Albright greeted, her voice a warm rasp. She led Alara into a sun-drenched parlor, where a porcelain teapot sat steaming on a doily-covered table. "And you're looking brighter today. What's put a spring in your step?" Alara felt a blush creep up her neck. "Just the weather, Mrs. Albright. It's lovely." She carefully unwrapped the shawl. "I was hoping you might have some ideas for repairing this tear." Mrs. Albright examined the delicate lace with a magnifying glass, her brow furrowed in concentration. "A challenge, but not impossible. This is beautiful work, child? From your mother, you said? Elara nodded, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. She must have been quite a woman. They spoke of mundane things, the rising cost of thread, the unpredictable spring showers, but the conversation soon drifted, as it always did, to Elara's work. She found herself confiding in Mrs. Albright about the relentless pace, the emotional toll, the quiet despair of some of her patients. She spoke of Dr. Eris, too, not in detail, but in vague allusions to his kindness, his sharp mind, the way he sometimes looked at her, a look that lingered a little too long. Mrs. Albright listened, occasionally clucking her tongue. Kindness is a rare commodity these days, Elara. Cherish it. And those old shoes of yours, are they still holding up? Elara glanced down at her worn footwear. They've seen better days, but they still serve. Mrs. Albright's eyes twinkled. Perhaps it's time for a change. Sometimes, a new beginning starts with the smallest things. As Elara walked home, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of rose and lavender, Mrs. Albright's words echoed in her mind. A new beginning. The thought felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't just about the shoes, not really. It was about allowing herself to hope, to step out of the shadows and into the light. The decision, once made, felt like a breath of fresh air, a burden lifted. Tomorrow, she would stop at the cobbler's, but she would also dare to dream a little, to let herself imagine a future that wasn't just about survival, but about living, truly living.